And we're back. Today, we're going to be covering wide receivers. So let's waste no time getting to the top 12 wide receivers for the 2019 fantasy football season. Coming in at number 12 is the wide receiver that finished 12th amongst all wide receivers this past season, and that is Stefon Diggs. He had an up and down year his first year with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback, but Diggs did sign a monster contract extension prior to this season, and for the most part paid off on that. He had his first 1,000-yard season, was 8th in the league in targets. He runs such good routes. He's so difficult to cover. I think he's going to continue to improve as a player going forward as well. The reason he's not higher on this list, though, is because Adam Thielen digs into his target share a lot, and that is a concern. Of course, you can have two viable receivers on the same team, but Thielen had more targets, receptions, and yards than Diggs this past year. And even though both are productive, Diggs predominantly gets the number one cornerback on any given team because Thielen lines up in the slot so frequently. At number 11 is T.Y. Hilton of the Indianapolis Colts. The connection between Hilton and Andrew Luck is sensational. Every time they're on the field together, good things seem to happen for the Colts. T.Y. missed 2 games this season with injury and still finished top 10 in receiving yards. This guy can do it all. In his last 6 years, he has over 1,000 receiving yards in every single year but one, and that was the year that Andrew Luck did not play at all due to his shoulder injury, and he still was within 40 yards of reaching that 1,000-yard mark. He has game-breaking speed. He's getting up there a little bit in age, but he can still beat a defense on any given play. Now, the reason T.Y. is not higher is because of those injury concerns. First and foremost, he seems to get nicked up a little bit every year. He is a smaller receiver, so can't take the hits that some can. And the other thing is he's not a red zone target at all. His most touchdowns ever in a season is only 7, which is not great for a top-tier receiver, which is what we're looking for. Even the year he led the NFL in receiving yards in 2016, he was still only 5th in fantasy points amongst wide receivers. At number 10 is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver, Mike Evans. And Evans quietly had one of the best seasons amongst all wide receivers this year, finishing 3rd in fantasy points, racking up over 1,500 yards. That's nothing new for Mike Evans. He has over 1,000 yards in every single one of his NFL seasons, all 5. He's a big-bodied receiver. He can make big plays down the field in the red zone. He was top 5 in the NFL this year in yards per catch. So this guy is no one to sleep on going forward in 2019. The reason he's only at 10, though, is because of that questionable quarterback play. Some of his yards this year were from Fitzpatrick. Some were from Jameis Winston. We expect it to be Winston, but that connection isn't as strong as most others on this list. And we know that touchdowns are a lot more varied than yards usually for players, but in Mike Evans' case, it's really extreme. Evans, like I said, has over 1,000 yards every season, but his touchdowns have varied anywhere from 3 to 12. This year was 8. So just that amount of variance scares me to put him any higher on this list. At number 9 is the aforementioned other Minnesota Vikings wide receiver, Adam Thielen. Thielen started the year off ridiculously hot, going for over 100 yards in each of his first 8 games. He finished the season only behind Mike Thomas and DeAndre Hopkins in receptions, setting career highs in receiving yards and touchdowns. Thielen can do it all. He's a big-bodied player, is fast, strong, has great hands. There's really nothing Thielen can't do at a high level. The reason he's only at 9, though, of course, is that Diggs does cut into his target share as well. There's not enough for both of them to be top 5 or top 10 players, in my opinion. And the other thing is his production did slip towards the end of the year. As we mentioned, he started off super hot, kind of declined from there. And I just think the other players on this list ahead of him are more explosive. At number 8 is Antonio Brown. And there's a lot to unfold with this Antonio Brown saga over the course of this offseason from now until the start of the 2019 year. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but one thing that we can't deny is his on-the-field production. Antonio Brown once again went over 1,200 yards this year for the 6th straight year. He also set the NFL high and a career high this year in receiving touchdowns, scoring 15 touchdowns this year. And he's just such a quick, smart player. He's seemingly always open. Even when he's not open, all you got to do is throw the ball up anywhere near him, and he seems to make a play on it every time. Antonio Brown somehow has been in the top 3 of fantasy wide receivers each of the last 5 years. That is just ridiculous consistency. This year he finished at number 2. So why is a guy that's been in the top 3 in 5 straight years down at 8? Because of all those question marks. Will he be a Steeler next year? It seems to be leaning towards no. Even if he is, Juju is coming along really strong, and he may take the torch from Antonio Brown. AB also is 30. He's the oldest receiver on this list. I'm not saying that he's done. I think he still has a lot left in the tank, but he is the oldest receiver on this list, so take that with what you will. At number 7 is the youngest player on this list, a second-round pick from the 2017 draft, and the Pittsburgh Steelers' number 1 receiver in 2019. It's Juju Smith-Schuster. Juju is set to explode as a receiver. We already saw his capabilities in his first 2 years. He continues to get better each year, and his 3rd year, I think, is going to continue to trend upward. He was 4th in the NFL in targets this past season. He had more catches and receiving yards than Antonio Brown, finishing with over 1,400 yards. So Juju is ready for a big workload. The reason he's not higher is there's too many moving pieces with him just being a young receiver in his 3rd year, and with the Steelers organization in general shipping players out. We don't know a lot about what their offense is going to look like next year. And he's never been a primary weapon at the NFL level. The USC product is going to be getting more attention from defenses. He has one of the highest upsides of any player on this list, but there's just enough to question for me to slot him right in at number 7. At number 6 is Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. Still a young player in his own right, just finishing up his 3rd season. But Thomas is a monster, and the thing is, his best may still be yet to come. He led all players in receptions this year with 125, posting an insane catch rate of 85%. Thomas has been over 1,100 yards in all of his 3 seasons. This last season was his best at over 1,400 yards. So why is Thomas only at 6? It's because he is so inconsistent from a game-to-game basis. He had 5 games this year of 5 points or less, including 4 of the final 6 in the regular season, because the Saints are always going to throw to the open man. That's Drew Brees' MO. He's going to hit the open guy, and if it's not Thomas, the Saints are content going somewhere else. They'll still move the ball down the field. Teams can game plan and really take out Thomas if they're willing to put 2 guys on him or focus coverage his way. The Saints will happily beat them in a different aspect of the game. So Thomas just can be game planned around. In some games, he's going to not have as productive of games as others. That variability puts him at 6. Number 5 is Odell Beckham Jr., and don't sleep on that New York Giant. He's still one of the most talented players in the NFL, even if he has had 2 disappointing years in a row. Odell missed the last 4 games this year with a quad injury, still finished with over 1,000 yards on the season. If you extrapolate those 12 games to a full 16-game season, he would have been at the wide receiver 6 on the year, and that is being part of one of the most inept offenses in the NFL. So Odell Beckham still is one of the best receivers in the game. Don't let a couple bad years slide him down your board. The reason he's only at 5, though, is, of course, that injury concern. When you get a player this high, you want to make sure they're on the field more often than not, and he has missed 4 or more games in 3 out of his 5 NFL seasons. The other reason is just that Giants offense. We know how terrible the downfield passing game was this year, and I don't think it's going to get worse, but if they go with a rookie quarterback, it could take some time for that partnership with a rookie and Odell to develop, leaving him at number 5. At number 4 is Davante Adams, and Adams this season really established himself as one of the elite wide receivers in the league. We usually don't see him as one of the top wide receivers in the league, or at least a lot of people don't, because they claim that his success is a byproduct of Aaron Rodgers' talent. But over the last 2 seasons, I think Adams has disproven that theory. Adams has been a beast this year, had over 1,300 yards, had 13 receiving touchdowns, good for 2nd best in the league. And Adams is just a red zone monster. He's the only receiver to have 10-plus touchdowns in each of his last 3 years. So that's where Adams' upside lies. You can count on those touchdowns, and touchdowns are hard to come by for most receivers, but Adams seems to get in the end zone almost every single game. The reason why Adams is only at 4 is because the Packers do have 2 young receivers they like. I could see Adams losing a couple targets to those players, but also I just feel like these other 3 players, while Adams is in that elite category for me, the other 3 players are just a little bit more talented, stronger, faster. I'd rather have them over Adams. Number 3 is Tyreek Hill, and the Cheetah has been doubted every single year consistently by people, and he continues to answer the call and prove them wrong. He's virtually unguardable, the fastest player in the league. You can't guard him one-on-one. Tyreek was the number 1 receiver in fantasy by over 20 points this year. And even in 2017 with Alex Smith, he still finished as the wide receiver 4 on the year. So his production is not just tied to Mahomes' incredible year, in my opinion. Tyreek's receptions, yards, and touchdowns have gone up in each of his first 3 years. This guy is trending in the right direction. The only reason he's not in my top 2 is because he doesn't have that target share that these top 2 guys have. They were both top 5 in targets. Tyreek was outside the top 10. And the other reason is that he's a younger player. The other 2 have done it over a longer period of time. So I'm just going to defer to those 2. But Tyreek is knocking on the door at number 3. Number 2 is Julio Jones. And Julio is a yardage monster. This guy just racks up yards every single season, every single game. This year, over 1,600 yards, led the league once again in receiving yards. And he's been over 1,400 yards in 5 straight seasons, which is just absolutely ridiculous. He averaged over 100 yards per game this year, and he's been close to that over this 5-year span. The lowest he's finished amongst fantasy wide receivers in those 5 years is wide receiver 7. So that consistency is just so invaluable whenever you have an opportunity to get a guy early on in the draft or high up at their position. You want to make sure they're not a bust. And with Julio, there's very low bust factor, which is one of the main reasons he comes in at 2. This guy is just consistent. You know what you're going to get with him. And he's only 29 still. He has a couple more years of being a top-tier wide receiver. The reason he's not number 1 is just those touchdowns. The touchdowns never seem to come for Julio. In this 5-year span of over 1,400 yards, the most touchdowns he's had in a season is 8. So he just doesn't have that touchdown upside. I can't give him the number 1 spot in 2019. And at number 1 on my receivers list is DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins is coming into the prime of his career, and he is one of, if not the best, wide receivers in the league. His connection with Deshaun Watson is lethal, and Watson is still just going into his 3rd year in 2019. I expect him to improve as a passer, and that connection is going to get even better. Watkins was the wide receiver 1 in 2017, was still the wide receiver 4 this year. I think he's going to continue to improve on that. He's one of the best players. He can do it all. He's big, strong, fast, runs great routes, can high point the ball, makes ridiculous catches. I think Hopkins is ready to show the whole entire football world in 2019 that he is the best wide receiver in terms of the NFL and in fantasy. So that's my rankings 1 through 10 for wide receivers at this point going into the 2019 season. Stay tuned for one more segment. We will be discussing the top 12 tight ends here shortly. Once again, let me know about my list. Who's too high, who's too low, who was left off the list. Thanks for watching, and tune in for tight ends here soon.